Very cool. Welcome, Fred.
But how come I get this and you get that?
Because that's what I get as a organizer, so I can shut people off. Welcome. It's awesome to have you. Very excited, and you definitely fall in the category of needing no introduction. But interesting milestones though these days, right? I read somewhere that you were about to, or you had celebrated the 10-year anniversary of your blog.
That's going to be next Monday. Is 10 years from the first blog post I wrote.
So lots of early morning writing at 5 a.m.
Exactly, 10 years of it. Am I showing the signs of it?
Absolutely not. The cream works wonder.
Exactly.
And some interesting exits. I guess we were talking about this backstage. You felt like nothing had happened in the last couple of months, but between Tumblr and some real-time messaging company that's about to go public. It's been some exciting milestones for you as well, right?
Yeah, the transaction that nobody really likes to talk about, which is maybe one of the companies that we're most proud of being involved with, is a company called Indeed.com that got sold last year in around this time. It was almost exactly a year ago now, which many people probably don't even know we were an investor in. We put $2.5 million into the company. That's all the money that they ever needed, and they sold for $1.4 billion. So that's as good as it gets, really, in the venture business.
Wow. Okay. So this is data driven. I was trying to make the mental calculation, and I stopped midway because I was going to get either.
And by the way, and your former colleague Renaud is killing it.
Yeah.
And I'm really
Renaud, my former colleague, is the CEO and founder of a company called Lending Club, which Fred is an investor in.
Yeah, and they're doing great.
Yep. So
are you an investor?
Yes.
Good. That would be a bad idea if you weren't.
So this is data-driven NYC, so we're going to talk about data-related topics. And so the way it's going to work, so you and I are going to chat for a little while, but this is very much a community event, so the whole idea is that we're going to open it up to you guys fairly quickly. The only request is that you ask questions which are somewhat related to the topic and nothing too sort of pitchy in terms of hey, I got this great company, can you invest? Type thing. So going back to the older USV blog post. By the way, that's the one downside of blogging, is that like everything is on record, right? But in this case, that was very consistent. So you had the initial thesis for the firm, or a part of it, seemed to be very much around this concept of having a defensible advantage that was based on a proprietary data asset,
right.
And then that seemed to have evolved towards a greater emphasis on networks. And network effects. How do you think about those? What are some examples of proprietary data assets, and why do they matter?
So we came to realize that the only defensibility that you can get with data is defensibility around your own data. If you're getting data from somebody else, it's not defensible because they can give it to somebody else as well. And even if you have an exclusive contract with them, that exclusive contract is going to come up at some point, and you're going to have to, if you've built a valuable business, you're going to have to pay through the nose for it. So we sort of realized that unless you own your data, you don't really have a defensible data asset. And then we started to look around and figure out where the most valuable data sets came from. And we saw these large networks that have gotten built up on top of the internet that create tremendous amount of data, and so that to us started to become, you call it an evolution, and I think that's probably the right way to put it, an evolution of our thing. We still very much believe in data. Let's take Twitter for an example. The stuff that Twitter's doing around discovery and who to follow and all those search, all those things leverage the data assets that they have, and and they are making the service better and better and better because of that. But that data exists because they have this massive network of people who are contributing to their system. And I would even argue that Google benefits from network effects and the data that they have in their search business, I think, almost an insurmountable advantage because of the data asset that they have and the network effects around that. So I would call it an evolution and maybe a getting smarter about what it was that we really wanted to seek. But the story I like to tell around software-based businesses and the power of the data asset is, it's a made-up story, but 3 entrepreneurs start a company and they come up with a new kind of enterprise software, and this enterprise software solves a new problem that nobody ever really attacked in the enterprise software arena before. And they go to market, they sell their software for between $250,000 and $1 million a year to enterprises, and they quickly build a couple $100 million company, and they go public. And then Bloomberg Beta funds 2 young 22-year-old programmers, and those 2 programmers basically knock off the enterprise software that this company makes, and they sell it for $10,000 a month, and they start taking share from this big company, and this big company's revenue starts to flatline and their stock crashes. This other company starts growing like a weed, and then a bunch of hackers create an open source project to create a version of this software, and all of a sudden everybody moves to the open source software, and both companies are screwed. And to me, that shows the problem of thinking that software is any kind of defensible advantage. I don't think it is. But if there was something about the data and the network around that software that made it so that it wouldn't be easy to leave the first company and go to the second company and leave the second company and go to the third company, then you'd have defensibility. So it's the intersection between software and data, and importantly, data that exists inside your system that doesn't come from outside your system that we look for in defensibility. So
is open source a data network? I mean, you've spoken about data networks. What is that exactly?
I think that open source is, and I don't have a great answer for this. Instinctively, I feel like open source and the communities that exist around open source create network advantages for the software that comes out of these open source communities. But I can't, if I got into a debate with somebody, I'm afraid I might lose because I don't really have the arguments honed there. But I intuitively believe that to be true.
What you've invested in the companies that have had the most massive network effects. Any lessons learned there that could apply to data networks in terms of like how you build those? Do they happen? How do you start them, defend them, build them further?
Well, I think free is really important. We have a company in our portfolio called Edmodo, which is a real phenomena. And what they did was two guys who worked in just the IT group inside a school system. And the teachers were complaining that, the software that the school system was using was horrible. They were using Blackboard or Moodle or something like that. And they just wanted something light and easy to share with their students, share their homework assignments, practice tests, lesson plans, reading material and such. And so they basically knocked off Facebook. They literally copied the Facebook newsfeed UI, and they gave it to teachers for free. But they did one other thing that I think was really, really powerful, which is that they allowed teachers, I think of the architecture as like this and like this. So they allowed teachers to connect to each other. And so 8th grade math teachers would connect to each other in groups, and they would share lesson plans and homework assignments and practice tests and those kinds of things. And then they would drop them down into their classrooms. And all this was free. So today, 4 years later, 5 million teachers, 70 million students are using it in the K through 12 system here in the United States. And what's amazing about it is that they don't charge for the software. This is replacing systems like Blackboard that cost, hundreds of thousands of dollars for a school district to deploy and get sold top down. And I think that the thing that's happening now is all this data that teachers are creating now is living inside of Edmodo. So teachers now have an incentive to create lesson plans and share them, and this content kind of is now living natively in the system. And over time, we believe that the network effects that exist inside Edmodo are mostly going to be around this content that people are creating and sharing inside the platform. Someone won't leave me alone. You would think they would get the message. Anyway, who knows? It doesn't appear to be any of my children.
So going back to the earlier question, so you mentioned that it's hard to build a business on top of data that's not yours. In a way, this place, Bloomberg, has built a multi-billion-dollar business that's all about aggregating a lot of data that's largely not theirs.
Yeah, but I would I would say that the most important data, which is the transactional and conversational messaging that goes on inside the platform, is created natively for the platform and stays inside the platform. And I think that's the glue that keeps everybody on Bloomberg. It's not the, you can get a stock quote anywhere. That's not why people use the Bloomberg. That's my opinion.
Happens to be mine as well. It's actually very few people understand that. So, quite fascinating. You had an interesting...
Which is a great point, okay? Which is that you can build a business by aggregating other people's data. But if you don't quickly use that base of users that you can get with a great aggregation system to build some kind of thing, some kind of network that exists inside your system that is proprietary and creates data that remains inside the system, someone can undo the advantage you have by being a good aggregator. But once you take the second step, it's going to be very hard to beat you.
Interesting. I see, and I'm sure you see tons more, companies that come into VC firms to pitch, and the pitch goes somewhere like this. We're building this great consumer product. It's going to do this and that. It's going to be free. We're going to turn it into a massive network. We're going to collect plenty of data, and then we're going to turn around and sell that data to hedge funds, advertising companies, any of these. Have you ever seen this actually work?
I don't think selling the data is the right thing to do. I think the right thing to do is to build services on your platform that take advantage of the data, that let the people who might buy the data from you instead come and build businesses and transact on your platform. Good example of that is Facebook doesn't really sell their data, but they provide an advertising system that's powered by their data that lets people, third parties, come onto the system and market to their users in hopefully highly targeted, effective ways. I think Twitter's doing the same thing. So that's an advertising version of that model, but you could also create e-commerce versions of that model. You could create financial services versions of that model.
So, I fully realize it's not your investment thesis, but any thoughts on sort of big data in general, right? Getting, tons of hype, lots of exciting things, lots of smoke and mirrors to some extent. What do you think?
I think that machine learning has hit an inflection point in the past few years. Artificial intelligence, machine learning, whatever we want to call it, to the point where we're starting to see these dreams that we've had for 30 plus years in terms of the potential of AI finally starting to get realized. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that machines learn from data, and we have so much data now that's available for to train these machines that that I think we're starting to see. You know, I think like the AI machine learning curve, you know, kind of looked like this for a long time, and maybe even like this. It was like very slow and frustrating, but I think it's like going like this now. And I think some of that is because of just the massive data sets that are now available. Some of it is because some big companies like Google, you know, have just made massive investments in it, and the returns on those investments are now abundantly clear to, you know, investors and the financial markets. And, you know, we're seeing that, you know, we're seeing self-driving cars come because Google was able to amass, you know, all these data sets that were required to essentially make it so that you can have a self-driving car. And all of a sudden people are realizing, I see what this play is. And then so I think entrepreneurs are jumping in, and lots of people are doing interesting things. So, you know, we're not investors in companies that are providing the pitchforks and shovels for the big data business. And by the way, I think that's a good business. But we are very much believers in the companies that we're invested in that do have big data sets to, you know, invest in the same way that Google has invested to, you know, do machine learning around those data sets and to try to leverage that to create more value for their business.
It's actually quite fascinating how Twitter has played an enormous role
right.
In the whole big data ecosystem by open sourcing a lot of stuff that they've developed. But there's like this entire ecosystem of companies that basically leverage Twitter data. Right, from
I mean, the fire hose, right? I mean, you know, that's the difference between Twitter and Facebook, right? I mean, well, there's a bunch of differences between Twitter and Facebook. I think the important ones are default public versus default private, follower versus friending, one-way follow model versus a two-way following model, and open fire hose versus closed fire hose. I think those three things tell you everything you need to know about the difference between those two companies.
So the other big trend with big data, which is very related to big data, is the whole, you know, Internet of Things, but also quantified self and all the things that contributes, you know, even more data to the system. Are you interested in that?
I'm very interested in that, and we're very interested in that.
You were tweeting about or blogging about the we things as well, the scale, right?
We want very much to invest in the intersection between big data and healthcare. We're about to make an investment, which will be our first in that area. We've been looking at it for 2 or 3 years, and we're about to make our first investment in that area. We looked at.
Are you looking for co-investors?
We'll talk. We looked at education for about 3 years before we made our first education investment, and then we quickly made about 5 or 6. So we have Edmodo, Duolingo, Codecademy, Skillshare, Stack Exchange, if you want to call that education. And I think that once we make this first investment in the intersection between big data and healthcare, I hope we will start to make a bunch, because I think we've finally started to wrap our head around how we want to go at this market, and what we want to invest in and what we don't want to invest in. And healthcare is maybe the greatest beneficiary of big data of any industry out there, but it's also a very protected industry for good reasons and bad, highly regulated for good reasons and bad, and a difficult one to be an upstart competitor in. So, you know, it's taken us a while to, and education, I think it took us a while to figure out how to navigate that for similar reasons.
You had an interesting post on I think you call it DIY data science.
Yeah, so nothing's really come of that. But I still think that that's an interesting area, which is we haven't really, you know, we have this hacker, these hacker communities around things like 3D printing and obviously writing software and hardware hacking and we, you know, maybe there's a data hacking movement, but, you know, I don't see it. Like, I don't know where it is, and I don't know how they do it, right? But I don't mean entrepreneurs starting data companies. I really mean individual people. I mean, some of it happens, right? So when City Bike launched in New York City, and they had a data feed that people can hack on, there was a bunch of people who quickly did some data hacking around that, and there were some cool visualizations that happened, and I thought that was awesome. But that's what I'm talking about. It's like I would love to see more of that happen, and where does that community go? What's the Reddit or the Stack Exchange or the Behance of that world? Where do they go? Where do they hang out? Where do they share their visualizations? What's the GitHub of that? Where do they show their algorithms and share their algorithms and share their visualizations? Maybe you know the answer to that and I don't, but that's what I was writing about.
Interesting. I mean, there's so much that's happening in the data world, specifically in New York, and you've been, arguably the central figure of the New York tech ecosystem for a while now. There's now 3 universities, Columbia, NYU, and soon Cornell, which offer specific data science programs, which is is also happening in other parts of the country, but as so much in one city that's pretty much unique. And there's all those interesting startups appearing. I mean, do you see sort of data-driven as sort of the next wave, or possibly the next wave, or has it always been part of the fabric?
Yes, I do, and I think it is one area where New York has had a long-standing expertise in, because of the financial services industry. So there have been quant-oriented hedge funds in New York for as long as, when I got out of MIT, the only really interesting jobs for nerds coming out of MIT in 1983 here in New York City were to be, what they used to call rocket scientists. Back in the day, that's what, we called each other, on Wall Street. And so, Wall Street has had a culture of data science for a long time. And so I think that it's sort of in the water here, and there's a lot of talent here that's good at it. And now as we're starting to see data science being applied to many, many more industries, I think it's going to be an area that New York will have a real expertise in. And not to say that, Silicon Valley doesn't have, just the sheer number of data scientists that some of the big internet companies are hiring out in Silicon Valley would suggest that, they're on par or maybe ahead of New York. But certainly I think it's one area that we can hold our own on.
Great, and to be on that point, and one last question from me, and then we'll open up. Do we have the mics lined up? Who's holding the mic? Okay, good. Just anecdotally to that point, are you starting? So the sort of the trendy thing, at least speaking to VCs about the type of teams that they like to see coming through their doors. It's typically the developer, the business person, and the designer, sort of like this triangle of skills. Are you starting to see companies that pitch with a data scientist or data person, or not yet?
Well, if they're big data companies, absolutely, yeah. But not consumer internet companies.
So it's not part of the.
But I don't necessarily think it should be, right? The first thing you got in consumer internet, even if big data and machine learning is going to be the thing that ultimately locks in your value proposition for the long haul, I don't think you get into the market and get the scale position that allows you to access that data with data science. You do it with, I think, a really simple, easy to use product that people love. So that says to me you want 2 or 3 good engineers, good designer, and probably CEO/VP product. That would be the kind of the perfect team to start a company if I was going to go start a company. But then I wouldn't have a job in that company, so why would I start a company? Because I can't do any of those jobs anymore.
That's the benefit of being a VC, right? You tell people what to do. Great. Any questions? So if you could please start with your name and company.
My name is Carlos. I work for Lockheed Martin. Do you have any big investments, or are you planning to invest in defense industries for big data? because the defense industry and the government is using a lot of big data products.
Yeah, of course the government's interested in big data. No, I don't want to sell. I don't want to be involved in selling tools that would be used to spy on anybody, including bad guys. It's not what I want to do. I won't invest in porn. I won't invest in spying. I won't invest in gambling. Those would be three things I wouldn't do.
I mean, if you can invest not only in that, not spying, but also like engineering or science.
What do so you do a lending club is an investment of an example of a sort of network effect type based company in finance, right? Is that what your question
No,
is?
he's talking about defense, though.
Oh, that's what you meant finance, okay.
Nah,
Sure.
I wouldn't do it.
Cool. Thanks.
Hi there.
Name and company, please.
Gary Russo. I work for a Silicon Valley database startup company called MarkLogic, doing document databases, competing with your Mongo company. Just want to hear your thoughts. Are you investing in semantic web technologies or linked data solutions?
No, first of all, I think that those are good things to do. But just to be clear, we really aren't good investors in companies that are bringing technologies to market, even though one could argue that that's exactly what MongoDB is. We have started to have a thesis around platforms that developers build on top of. Twilio, SIF Science, Firebase, and MongoDB. So we do like to invest in platforms for developers. But a lot of what you're talking about, I'm thinking about as more sort of data science infrastructure tools. And we are not investing in that right now. We can't wrap our head around how that fits into the world the way we see it. So the answer to that is no.
Hi, I'm an internet estimator right now, but I'm actually a student at NYU doing finance. And I was wondering, how do you, when you go out and try to invest in a startup, right, how do you anticipate that that startup is going to create a huge network, right, or is going to be able to create a lot of data? How do you anticipate that? And so rather, the main question is, how do you choose a startup to invest in?
Well, for us, it just comes down to usage. Usage is going to create data. Now, what kind of data is it going to create? Well, that's an important factor because certain kinds of data is more valuable than others. But, it really comes down to trying to find teams that are building products and services that we think will have tens of millions or hundreds of millions of users. And that's an imperfect science. Trust me.
Yeah, I know you can't run a DCF on a startup, right?
No, but it first and foremost, it has to have a lot of users. Because if it doesn't have a lot of users, it's not going to have a lot of data. If it's not going to have a lot of data, it's going to be hard to do any really interesting data science around it. So I think that's where we start, is looking for something that we think could get millions or tens of millions or hundreds of millions of users.
And how do you know that it's going to get?
We don't. It's just, there's some, you can use a product, you can feel it, you can get a sense of it. There's some that's just a judgment call and an instinct call. There's also evidence. You can see early adoption. This sorts of adoption curves can sometimes tell you things.
Great. Next.
Hi, sorry. My name's Carl Antle.
Sorry.
Hi there. My name is Carl Antle. Work with a small incubator here in New York called Value Stream Labs. My question was actually a network question around some of the capital marketplaces that we kind of meet with a lot. And just using Lending Club as an example, it started out very much as a peer-to-peer lending platform. I think we've seen a lot more institutional money start coming in on the financial side. There's a lot of hedge funds using the API to kind of like nip at loans. I was curious, your view of how this marketplace grows, do you think that a lot of the value generation comes from the true peer-to-peer aspect of those kind of networks? Or is it the low-cost online origination and kind of like innovative underwriting structures they put in place? Would those platforms do just as well with a few large hedge funds providing the capital?
That's a great question. Clearly, a big piece of the value is reducing the cost to underwrite and make a loan and service the loan. And Lending Club can do that at maybe a third of the cost of what a traditional lender can do it at. So that gives them a competitive advantage. But I do think that if all of the supply of capital on the Lending Club market was being provided by institutions and the small investor could no longer play in that market, that would be a bad thing. And I really haven't thought a lot about it. I certainly haven't discussed it to the Lending Club team, and I don't know what they're doing, if anything, to ensure that that doesn't happen. But I get the sense that there's you want to have a market that anybody who wants to lend money can lend money on a level playing field, and that just seems right. So I don't think it's a good idea if it goes all institutional. And the other thing I would say is I don't think you could start something like that all institutional. Almost every big network that we've invested in that's been very successful has started out with just kind of almost, I don't know if that's the right word, just people, right? Just random people. And that over time, bigger and bigger names have come onto it. So, in the case of Lending Club, that's hedge funds are now lending on the platform. In terms of Kickstarter, Spike Lee is now raising money on the platform. In terms of Twitter, celebrities showed up after a while. In terms of Etsy, there's now, people who are selling on Etsy who, are, really, name people, right? But they all got started much more sort of grassrootsy, and I don't really have a great thesis around why that is, but I've seen it again and again. And so when entrepreneurs come in and say, we're going to bootstrap, one side of our market, the demand side of the supply side, by going to institutions or going, kind of bypassing the little guy and going to large chunks of supply or demand, that always strikes me as a bad idea. And I just don't think that's that easy to do.
Maybe on this side. Thank you.
My name is Victor Coppola. I work for WebMD. You mentioned healthcare. What aspect of healthcare do you see taking off in big data? Is it more on the clinical side? You mentioned AI, things like Memorial Sloan Kettering is doing with IBM, on diagnosing conditions. Are you seeing things in communities? What area of healthcare? It's a big...
everything you mentioned, I think, is interesting, honestly. I think diagnosis is really interesting. I think preventive care is really interesting. I think communities are really interesting. When we look at healthcare, it reminds me a lot of some of the things that we ultimately concluded when we looked at education, which is don't try to service the existing infrastructure. Don't try to, sell them better tools. Try to go directly to the patients or directly to the doctors. And in my view, I'm kind of making this up, by the way, I'm winging it. Doctors are like teachers, and students are like patients. And hospitals are like, schools or universities. And so what's worked for us in education is to service the teachers and the students and ignore the institutions. And I think what will work for us in healthcare is to service the doctors and the patients and ignore the hospitals and the insurance companies and all the big honking bureaucratic institutions in healthcare.
I'm Wayne. I'm an independent consultant. I'd be interested to know if you think there's anything going on now in payments, in particular social or peer-to-peer payments.
Well, I'm obsessed with Bitcoin. And, it's really, I probably spend more time thinking about Bitcoin than anything else right now. And not the currency, and not what price Bitcoin is trading at. And that's not what I'm obsessing about. What I'm obsessing about is that we've had the commercial internet for 20 years, and the commercial internet is built on top of a bunch of open protocols like HTTP and TCP/IP. Mail runs on SMTP and IMAP, and we can go on and on and on. And it's distributed and it's global, and nobody controls any of this stuff. Literally, an entrepreneur can connect a server to the internet anywhere in the world, and I can access it from this device, right? And that's awesome, right? And that's unleashed an incredible amount of innovation. But we've never had the payments protocol for the internet. We've never had the native payments layer. There's never been programmable money on the internet. And so we've had to hack credit card systems and ACH and banking, and all this stuff had to be hacked and kludged to the global internet. And Bitcoin, the innovation there is the blockchain. It's this ledger that every transaction clears on in a peer-to-peer global way, so that there is no one representation of the blockchain. The blockchain lives everywhere, and that every transaction clears on the blockchain. That's a big deal. And so we have this architecture and this protocol and this system that we can now build on top of. And I just frankly a little surprised that more entrepreneurs aren't building on top of it, because it's there, it's all there, right? And what has been built, what people have built, are exchanges to convert fiat currency to Bitcoin, which is great. We need that. And wallets and secure storage systems for Bitcoin, and we've started to see some merchant processing systems. We're invested in a company, Coinbase, that does that stuff, and they're great, and I love it. But there's all this other stuff that could be built on top of Bitcoin, and all the people who are in the business of processing payments and moving money. Like, I don't understand why they're not, building systems on top of Bitcoin to take costs out of the way they do business. So that's what's interesting to me right now in payments. And it's not like mobile payments or micro payments. Like, to my mind, all that should be running on Bitcoin.
So I'm not clear, you like Bitcoin?
Love it.
Margaret Ost. I'm an independent right now, looking for my next big thing.
It's Bitcoin. I promise you.
You mentioned health, and we all read the newspapers, and some of us have been patients in the hospital, some of us have never been patients in the hospital, and some of us have been under anesthesia, and you know that you have no control over what happens to you in the hospital under those circumstances. You don't know what they're giving you or injecting you. You can't double check the labels, and complications means a death that shouldn't have happened. And I wondered, since transparency might seem to be a good thing over the control that you might have when you go to the hospital, what of those elements, even hand washing is a big deal right now, front page of the Times. What maybe these 100-year-old problems you might be addressing?
If every procedure and everything that was used in that procedure and every piece of data about that procedure, your heart rate, your blood chemistry, everything was public and open, that anybody could look at, that there was radical transparency. Now, patients probably are all saying, I don't want that. I don't want the world to know, what was going on in my body while I was under the knife. But if that were the case, I think we live in a better world, because people couldn't hide from the mistakes that are made, and you'd have essentially self-policing could go on that doesn't exist today. So I'm a big fan of radical transparency, and I think one of the problems, look, the NSA is spying on all of us, but they are not spying on Congress. They're not spying on themselves. They're not spying on the Pentagon. Like, what the fuck is that, right? Like, if you're going to spy, you got to spy on everybody. And the problem is, it's the people who are bad who are not getting spied on. It's us good people who are getting spied on. So I think the same thing's true in healthcare. We should just be way, way more transparent about the data. That's my feeling.
More spying in hospitals.
Yeah. Yes. Absolutely.
All right, we have time for one last, because I promised I would get you out of the door by 7. Good.
Hey, Fred.
Hey.
My name is Matt. I work as an enterprise manager for MongoDB. So
Yes.
USV company. I had a generalized question about just the big data investment landscape. What is, in your opinion, the burden for startups to prove themselves as worthy investment right now, especially the ones that try to throw themselves in this big data buzzword, right? We've seen over the past 2 years, probably over 100 of them present in this room.
Right.
But what do they need to prove to someone like you to be worthy of an investment? Is it the business model, or does just
not
having,
business model?
No?
Not me.
Yeah.
I don't care about the business model, because we can tweak the business model. We can get the business model right. What I care about are, do you have users, and are they getting value out of your product, and how much value they're getting out of your product, and what's your net promoter score? I'm using that in quotes, because I don't really mean your net promoter score, but the way net promoter score is calculated, it's like, would you tell your best friend to use this product, right? That's what I care about. Have you built something that people give a shit about? Does it make their life better? And, are more and more people going to come knocking on your door to use your product? And that's what we look for. Really, at the end of the day, that plus a good team, that's it.
All right, so unfortunately, we're going to need to call it a wrap. Thank you so much. It was wonderful having you.
Great. Thank you.